Welcome to 2 Month Review. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm here with Brian Wood on our weekly podcast. I always screwed up. I'm never sure if you're going to say something or not. So this is our weekly podcast where we talk about a particular book or author's works.
If we screwed it up and stopped, let me at least say hi. Hello. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So,
is that so hard? Just whatever. Who cares? Just go. Just go.
There's something. Yeah. Selected Stories by Merce Rodoreda is the book we're talking about this week on the 2 Month Review. We're covering that and then Death in Spring. We do this weekly. We talk about books. We talk about the book slowly. We talk about little bits of it. We have guests come on. We have some jokes. We do things, so on and so forth. I'm not going to thank all of our donors this time, which we did last week, which thank you guys again for helping make our fundraising campaign a huge success. But I am going to tell everyone that on December 12th, Tuesday, December 12th at 7 p.m., we will be recording the 2 Month Review live at the new McNally Jackson store. The new one is in Williamsburg. It is, let me find the actual address. I think it is 76 North 4th Street in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn. And it'll be at 7 p.m. Brian will be there. Maria Christina Hall from the Ramon Llull Institute will be there. And we'll talk about the end of Death in Spring, Death in Spring as a whole, Rodoreda as a whole, Ramon Llull Institute and what they do, and Catalonia, which may or may not exist.
Oh, geez.
At that time. So it'll be fun. It'll be really fun. So anyone that's in the area, plan on it, put it on your calendar. You'll get a bunch of reminders about this. And also, if you can't be there but want to participate, you can always email us a question, sign up on GoodReads to the group, and post your question there. And we will read them all out loud. We'll answer anything that anyone has to say. And it'll be just a genuinely good time. There'll also be Spanish wine. So there's an incentive for you.
All right.
So anyways.
We'll be on performance-enhancing drugs, also known as wine.
Yes. I think wine does enhance the performance of the podcast.
Yeah. So, hey, I wanted to ask you, I don't know if we've had a chance to or not, but you went to Spain recently, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you went to the Catalonia area?
Yep. We were in Barcelona and Valencia. Or Valencia.
Okay. And Valencia, Valencia is not Catalonian?
It is.
It is Catalonia?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Did you get a feel? Like, are there people are they really torn between the whole Spain Catalonia thing from what you gathered your interactions with people? Yes,
and it's pretty complicated. So there's a bunch of different viewpoints, but the Ramon Llull Institute people were primarily pro-independence, and a lot of it has to deal with like the way that the taxes are reallocated and the funding goes to the overall Spanish government and then gets reallocated to a lot of places that are not Catalonia. And I think there's like some despair over that and over the fact that they don't have as much control. But then the thing that makes it complicated is that a lot of the sort of pro-independence people in the Catalonian government is a minority, but they're a very vocal minority. And when no one else would participate because they wanted the referendum, which was deemed to be illegal by Spain, most people who were like sort of on the fence or not really invested in the referendum just were no longer allowed to participate in the Catalonian government's like discussions of that referendum. It became just like a group of people who were for that. They were the only people who were giving their voice and explaining why it was important, which is off-putting. And so a lot of people distanced themselves. A lot of politicians sort of distanced themselves from it because they didn't want to end up going to jail when Madrid said, no, this isn't going to work. And so there's a whole group of people like Valerie Miles, who I talked to a lot about this. And I think, and Mara Hay Leatham, who's going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, she's got a lot of information and a lot of good perspective because she lived there for a long time and her husband is Catalonian. But they both had like the sort of like, it's not really a great idea to break off because you don't have any of the infrastructure that you need to be your own nation. And a lot of their voices were not being heard in this referendum vote. The referendum vote became more of a sort of patriotic, smaller thing than like a more well thought out, larger issue. Because there's a lot of violence from Madrid, which does not help the situation at all. So like the Spanish government, closing down polling stations and attacking people and all the videos on beating each other or beating these people are horrible and awful and make it the whole thing awful. And at the same time, there are some videos that have surfaced of like Catalonians attacking Spanish people who live in Catalonia and are for Catalonia as a whole, but because they're not actually Catalan and they speak Spanish, they were sort of being pushed aside by the pure Catalan people. So I think that there's a lot of levels to this.
This all sounds like fake news to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm not even sure this is a real country.
Yeah, I'm completely ignorant of the history and what's going on and that sort of thing. So it's really interesting to be trying to catch up when there's all this turmoil. It's in the news every day, and so
I just said it's easier just to pay attention to like Kevin Spacey's career and Louis C.K. than it is to understand what's going on in Catalonia.
Yeah. Can't we just talk about rape and pedophilia? That's something I really understand a lot more here in America than independence and freedom.
It's in that case, it's clear what's good and bad. In this case, in terms of voting for independence, I don't know. It's very confusing.
And you were there because the 11th of September is an important date for them, right?
September 11th is
not for pedophiles, but in Spain.
It is the Catalan National Day of Independence. Is September 11th, and there was this great shirt that like is super offensive.
How do they have independence? How do they have an Independence Day if they're not independent?
It's for when they were first taken over, and like when they became sort of like their own autonomous region. So it's like to
it's
be
like a very patriotic.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And there was a T-shirt, and I don't know if this is actually what this meant, but I sort of think it is. This is going to be offensive to a lot of people, but someone was wearing a T-shirt
by all means,
there.
And say it loud.
We'll do it. We'll just put it on here. So there's a T-shirt I saw that had, because the dates are backwards in Europe, right? So like the day comes before the month. So it said 11/9 greater than 9/11, and
oh my God!
I'm not sure if that means what I assume it means, but
okay.
If
whatever.
it does, like, well then, like, that's a bold ass statement.
My interpretation of this date is more important than your interpretation of this date. Like, that's the world we're living in today, right?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And maybe it was something else they're just not aware of. But like, the first thought as an American is like, go straight to 9/11 and.
It's a hashtag war. Which hashtag's more important, right?
There's a great scene in there's a TV show called Legit that used to be on. It was a like 3-season show on FX, and it's fucking brilliant. If you haven't seen this, you'd love this show. It's about a comedian from Australia that's trying to like get his life back together, and it just goes down in these 3 seasons, this very dark path, and ends in like. I mean, it's heartbreaking and intense and emotional, but there's one very funny scene near the beginning in which he's at a baseball game and he refuses to stand for the national anthem and starts saying things like, the people are like, come on, you got to stand. It's like after 9/11, it's like important. He's like, it's 11/9. You can't use the dates the way everyone else does. Get the metric system.
No, it's funny because you had said in Europe they have the dates backwards, right?
Yeah, right.
Europe's
yeah.
Probably like, Americans are idiots. You guys have it all wrong.
We have it backwards. Anyway,
the very first time I flew internationally, they were serving food. I must have been like in 8th grade or something, and it had the expiration date on it, but it was in a European date, and I got like scared that they were serving me food that was like 5 months expired, and the flight attendant had to be really kind. I was like, this is a European date. This is how dates are. She had to explain it to me. I felt so dumb.
Although if it was United, you never know. I mean, not to throw them under the bus, but I just came back on there and wow, it's a trip. Anyways,
well, let's
call
we
George.
are going to talk about books, right?
Yeah, let's talk to George about these stories from whatever pages it was, 143 through 207, I guess. So let's give him a call.
All righty.
Okay, welcome, George Carroll. Thank you for joining us to talk about Merced Rodoreda's The Selected Stories. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm in the middle of a windstorm.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, it's supposed to peak in a couple hours, but it's pretty nasty. It's pretty crazy.
Jesus, that doesn't sound like fun.
So if all of a sudden the lights could go out,
Oh my God!
On many different levels, the lights could go out. So
hey, it feels a little bit like the last story that we're going to talk about. Orléans 3 kilometers. You're just part of a raid.
Oh, good.
So George, do you want to say a few things? Like you are a sales rep for a number of different publishers out on the West Coast. You've written a lot about international literature for Shelf Awareness. You run your own website that also covers international literature. You've been a judge for the Best Translated Book Award. Is there anything else that you want to add about yourself before we start asking about Mercé?
I'm qualified to talk about this because I am a published short story writer.
Oh.
Hey, there you go.
And when I say that, I mean one. One short story.
That's one more than most, so that's a feather in your cap, man.
One more than me. So you got that.
It was like 30 years ago or something. I wrote this short story that ended up in this. There was a rag called the San Francisco Review of Books for a while.
Oh, I remember that.
It ended up in there. It was like a really just horrible story called The Queen of Mexico. And I wrote one story and it got published and I figured, okay, I'm a published short story author.
There you go.
I'm just gonna run with it.
Yeah. After that, you can just hang it up. You're good. You've accomplished all you need to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. It's on the TV somewhere.
Yeah. Do you still write short stories or no?
No, I figured I was batting 1,000, and I figured.
Well, hey, once you summit Everest, you're looking down at everything at that point, right? So
That's right. I even got paid for it, which is amazing.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
There is one other thing I want to add to your bio. You're also a very good Taga player for fantasy soccer.
Well, I eased into first in our league last year, but that was I was like 10 points ahead of you or something. It was like just barely. But this year you're just you're cleaning the clock, man. You're like way ahead of me.
I don't think so. I was just trying to look this up, but I feel like I suck at the thing I'm terrible at is paying attention to who's playing in the day that the games are going on. So I wake up and I'm like, wow, the games have started. That's cool. And then I look and I'm like, oh shit, half my players are on the bench. That's cool.
Well, out here, the early game started at 4.
That's insanity.
And there's no way I'm going to get up at 3:30 and find out if Pochettino's going to play Dele Alli or not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going to happen.
So when you say out here, is that you're on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle.
Seattle, okay.
Oh yeah, I'm beating you by 60 points.
See, you're just cleaning up.
Out of 1,400, it's barely a lead. But
so George, what's your connection to Rodoreda? Have you read some of her stuff before, or?
I don't think I've read anything that's been transferred or translated from Catalan at all before.
Oh, wow. But you have a 1,000 Morons T-shirt.
Okay, I've read one book. That's right. I did read Kim's book. Yeah. So that's one. Mostly, I think what I end up reading is Spanish and Portuguese, stuff out of Spanish and Portuguese.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was new, and the short stories are my introduction to her. Unlike Mark Haber, who's read the entire corpus.
Yeah,
well, I'm in the same boat as you. Yeah,
dude. So I was in Brazil this past week in Sao Paulo for this conference related to getting the Brazilian literature into English, and of course, there was no talk except about Clarice Lispector. More or less. I mean, there are some other things, but there's so much about her, right? And over and over again, it's like, you guys must know Mercé Rodoreda because she's like Lispector, but Catalan. I actually think that she's better than Lispector, although I might be on an island with that one. But
hot take.
I don't. Yeah, I will go there. I think that Rodoreda's novels are much better than Lispector's. I think Hour of the Star is good. The other ones I find tedious. and I think the short stories are the equivalent. Anyways, they didn't really know who she was at all. They hadn't really heard. There was one person who had heard of Rodoreda, and there is a copy of Time of the Doves, at least, that's been translated into Portuguese and published in Brazil. But other than that, they were like completely unaware, which is like, it baffled me a little bit, because like you'd think that these countries that are like so supportive of a particular type of writing and of the idea of these books being translated would be at least somewhat aware of like what else is out there from equivalent cultures. But I guess not.
I'm not surprised about anything anymore.
Yeah.
You tend toward darker, yeah, which Rodoreda is definitely darker than the Spectre.
You think so? I mean, the Spectre she has a character eat a fucking roach. That's pretty bad.
Who hasn't eaten a roach on a bad day? Come on, man. That's not get out of here.
As she thinks about her existential endings.
You have eaten a roach on one hand and you have drowning a baby on the other. Come on.
One does tip the scale a little bit more.
A little bit.
Have you seen these Brazilian roaches, though, man? They are like a baby. She pretty much drowned a baby roach in her stomach.
One time I was in West Africa and I stepped on a roach that was in my room, and the thing was so thick. It was like one of those big packs of gum that you used to buy that has like 38 pieces of gum. And I stepped on it, and I felt my foot didn't hit the ground because it was so thick.
Oh.
It freaked me out, and I took my foot off, and the thing scuttled away. It was still fine.
Oh my God!
So a roach could be a meal, depending on you get to those jungle climates.
That's very true. I think as a selling point, as to make it a positive thing, if you like Clarice Lispector, you would like Merce Rodoreda.
And that collected stories book by Spectre is thick, dude. That's like a bowl of oatmeal thick. That's kind of ridiculous.
Would it go the other way, though? If you like Rodoreda, would you like Lispector?
I think so. Because I think there's something they were writing at similar points in time. There's like sort of a they're not connected in terms of their style exactly, but in terms of like what they're writing about and the sort of existential nature of their writing, I think that those are similar. And I think if you like one, you probably like the other, and maybe for slightly different reasons. They're not like exactly analogous, obviously, but I could see a lot of readers overlapping with those two.
Rodoreda's got that sort of that failed relationship thing going all the way through. It reminds the short story collection reminds me of like Joni Mitchell's Blue album. It's like one failed relationship after another. It's like woman meets man, everything turns to shit. It's like everyone. It's either Joni Mitchell, maybe the Tracy Chapman album. I'm not sure. It's pretty close.
But yeah, absolutely.
It is. That's so funny. That's so funny you bring up music, because I keep seeing these, like articles where they make a playlist to go with a book or something like that. And right now, my daughter only wants to listen to Bruno Mars. She's 2.
Oh no!
And so I'm reading these stories to like Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. And I'm like, this is the worst music you could listen to. He's over here talking about 24 karat magic and like the baby's drowning and everything is hell. Like it is the worst playlist to read these stories to is Bruno Mars. Don't do that one.
we should put together a playlist for this. So the music that we have to open this season is like super upbeat too, because it's from Martí Salas, he was a punk rock musician, Catalan musician, and a poet, and he's a huge Rodoreda fan. So I thought we'd do a little homage to him by like including that. But it's so upbeat when you listen to it, and then you read the stories, you're like, "Fuck, man!" Like, these don't match at all in tone. But when we get to the novel too, I think the novel is something that you'll really like, George. Death in Spring, because it's a little bit more extended. It's not just about failed relationships. It's about a lot of like other crazy sort of mythological and faux mythological things. But still, I think the stories are really intense. In this section that we went that for today, like the 144 through 207, there's a couple in here that are like not necessarily the failed relationship ones. Although there are Before I Die definitely is, Adelise is definitely, but the Orléans 3 kilometers, which I was really excited to go back to, since at the time that I first read it, I didn't realize that she had been there in France during that particular German raid and like left, and that's when they escaped and went to Switzerland. But that one's like less of the failed relationship and more of like, well, war is pretty shitty.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we dig into Before I Die? I think it runs 144 to 168. That's kind of the biggest chunk of this section, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think it goes in perfect with the Joni Mitchell playlist.
Yes.
So, what did you guys...
Particularly with, like, the last time I saw Richard, all romantic, meet the same fate someday, cynical and drunk and boring. Cynical and drunk and like, dead. It's all right.
So Chad, why don't you give a real brief, broad stroke? What's going on in the story Before I Die?
So Before I Die is the story of this woman who meets this guy at a cafe, and he keeps coming. They keep meeting at this cafe every single day. They sort of fall in love. She gets married to him, and then she discovers that he's always carrying around this briefcase. And when she sort of sneaks into his briefcase because her curiosity just overtakes her, she finds a series of love letters from a different woman that he had been involved with, and that their relationship ended. And so this sort of breaks her mind in the sense that she can't deal with the past of him having had this very like extreme love affair. And so she leaves and she decides to kill herself, of course, because, that's how these stories are going to go. Yep. That's pretty much it, I think.
I think it might have been my favorite of the, maybe just because of the length. It just, there's like a paragraph in the story that of all the stories, there was this paragraph that I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
It's just 2 sentences, but it's kind of like sort of the sweetest part of the story. It's this is when she sort of decides that even though she's really not in love with him, she decides to sort of make herself in love with him.
Yeah.
Does that work for you?
Yes.
Yeah, she like commits, gives herself over to him. Like he kind of somehow wins her over with his,
But the 2 sentences, it's sometimes when I'm alone or when I'm bathing or when Marius falls asleep before me, I think my husband. And when he sleeps, I place my hand on his side and feel his rhythmic breathing against my palm and think, my husband. I thought it was like really sweet.
That really is.
And then it all goes to shit again. So
yeah, I mean, like just a few pages later the 3 sentences or 2 sentences. Despite the hatred I now feel for Marius, I have loved only him. He has been the center of my life.
I hope his letter burns his hands.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of reminds me of Carnival, where you have these sweet, tender moments as they're walking the streets at night, and it just ends awful for everybody involved.
This was a story I alluded to last week, where I was saying like a lot of the ones leading up with the relationships that fall apart are all based on this future activity. So like there's a lot of the Carnival even is like, this future could be so great. They could have this great love affair, but they don't. It all sort of doesn't work. And then there's a lot of the earlier stories where where a woman will fall in love with a man and then realize like, I'm getting older. He's going to have an affair with his secretary. Things are not going to work out. And that sort of causes a fall apart. And this is the one that's sort of reversed, where like she's in love with him. They're happy as a couple. And then it's because of this past that can't be quarantined, that she ends up like becoming obsessed with, and that ends up ruining their relationship. So it's kind of like an inverted version of her traditional like why things don't work pattern, I guess.
Yeah, as I was reading this one, like as I was picturing in my mind, it kind of unfolded the way like a Hitchcock film would be, where there's some small inciting incident that starts a mystery that unravels, and then everything is ruined because of like this one little letter. You had to see what the letter was, and then you had to investigate the letter. Then you had to go to it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and worse, and like spirals into madness.
Yeah, it really does. It becomes very obsessive. There's like that sense of obsession in a lot of these stories where that sort of drives everything. And I really like that about her too.
Yeah, how creepy was it? Like that little, I forget what the phrase was, but making her whisper the same thing that the other girl whispered into his ear. It becomes really creepy.
Yeah, Amor Mieux, or I don't know how you say that, but yeah, I love.
Oof.
Yeah, yes. And there's like an obsession on both sides for her and for him.
Yeah, because he's no saint either. My goodness.
Oh, man. Yeah. So, George, were there other ones that you liked from this particular section, or that stood out to you?
I was just trying to think. Isn't this? I'm trying to think of the Hitchcock reference. Is Rebecca have some sort of twist like that in it? I was trying to think of very Hitchcockian.
Like
if there was a parallel in there somewhere. Can't remember.
To me, like the lowest hanging fruit would be like Vertigo, when he gets all wrapped up in that woman and his whole life becomes involved in discovering the woman, and it just goes off the rails. And then there's like the weird lust of like he wants to dress up like her, and like I don't think the two are parallel to that, but just in my mind, like that's how I was kind of seeing things, like this weird, the MacGuffin of that letter, and then once you start unraveling it, what it does to the relationship. It was funny. I was gonna submit a story to a magazine, but they had mentioned that they don't want any stories about failed relationships or marriages or. So I was thinking, like, so you don't want any story ever written by Rodoreda because you can't talk about human beings not getting along. Apparently, like why would you put that in your submission requirements? Like,
oh man,
I keep thinking that every time I'm reading these stories. Like, please, no stories about human struggle.
I think. These are fun too, because this section too, like last week, is where she does have that. The Before I Die is very much in that vein of the failed human relationship one, but she is starting to branch out again in here and starting to play with different ideas in this little section. Like even Night and Fog is a little bit different. The Orleans 3 Kilometers definitely is, although there is like that creepy ass ending to it, where like the guy's in the room and then she's just like, and the rats are there and she's freaking out.
So it might be neat, though. The story right after that, Ada Liz, has a very different tone and style compared to Before I Die.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it has like this. There's this romanticism and lyricism to it that's completely different from her other work, I think.
That's an interesting point.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If you combine the names, if you make it like one word, Adelise, it's a diminutive of Adelaide. And I was trying to figure out if there was some sort of like historical reference or literary reference to somebody named Adelaide who she could have pulled this from. But then I think I was overthinking it.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Maybe not, man. Rodoreda is a pretty smart cookie. I would not be surprised. But just like the language, like on page 173, you get to this. This is some Maria Teresa. She can never be Adelise. One day you'll find yourself all alone on the open sea, and the wind will bear my name, the storm my perfumed hair, the calm my caresses, the caresses I gave you, knowing you would never be mine. Do you understand? As like it goes on and on, that sounds like an epic poem or something.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
This one is a pure like woman's love sort of story in a way. Like she's very much like devoted to the idea of romance and love in this, and like it's heartbreaking because she's like could have had so much but like didn't realize that Dakar was on a port and like was like, no, I'm not going to go off with you because I need to be near the water, and it's like, oh shit. It actually was by the water. God damn it. I lost. But there is that sort of romantic, poetic aspect to this is really strong.
So help me out with the next one. On a Dark Night. Yeah. This is my WTF short story. I kind of got lost in this one.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm trying to remember because I read these like over the course of a week. I'd read one each day. I kind of remember like being sort of...
This is like a soldier who ends up ends up in a woman's place, but you're not really sure if the woman exists or if it's...
Right. This could be a Jacob's Ladder, too, where he's dying, and this is his last imaginary idea that he escapes from the war and goes to, like, that woman's house who's been waiting for him, and they have, like, this amazing love affair, and her name is Loki, of course, which is...
I was going to say, of course, you got Loki, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just waiting for it to all end with, your neck is still in the noose on the bridge, or like, the Ambrose Bierce kind of.
I assumed that Thor was going to come in and just kick some ass. I was just waiting for Thor. I was sort of disappointed.
Sorry, Chad, but this is technically not canon for the MCU, so this would have to be some sort of... It could be animated, but not an actual film.
Fair enough. But yeah, that one, I was a little confused by this one too, but I thought that it was... My interpretation was that he was in the war as a soldier, that he had been injured, and that this was sort of his imagination of this way out. That, like, the opposite of war is this kind of remarkable house with this woman, with this love, with this moment, and that's what kind of is the balance in life against war and against wartime. And I mean, I can't imagine what it was like. I mean, it's impossible sometimes to fathom certain things for me, like wartime, and even like the World War II stuff, the stuff in Franco time in Catalonia, and all the crazy shit that was going on there, and then running away and being caught in like World War II. That just seems like all the books I've read, all the movies I've seen, all that stuff, like it's there. I get it, but at the same time, like the actual emotional experience of that would be so devastating and so hard to like to deal with that I don't think I can fully understand that.
I think that's a fair response. A quick tangent though. You had mentioned like the Jacob's Ladder. When I must have been like 6 or 7. My parents are like super religious, and so they were going out somewhere and they rented a movie that I could watch, and they rented Jacob's Ladder because they thought it was a movie about the Bible. And they let me watch Jacob's Ladder by myself, alone in the dark, and it freaked me the fuck out, dude. I'm traumatized by that. Can you imagine a kid watching Jacob's Ladder by themselves?
Oh my God.
Oh God.
This one too, I really do think, going back to this, I think that is kind of what's happening here, because the very beginning paragraph or 2 paragraphs are, why am I in this room? I asked myself suddenly, but my thoughts refused to respond. Along with everything else, they too were lost. You see, Loki exclaimed as she sat on my lap, the windows of my house are for decoration. Neither light nor wind enters them. Then she added as if it were the most natural thing, did you know that I was born to live only at night? And I feel like it is like this, that kind of opposing, and he's dying in this sort of a imposed thing. But I'd be curious if any listeners have any interpretations of this, please send them along, because this was one too that I have a bunch of questions along my notes pages and things that are underlined with like little things beside, like I died at dawn, wanting to be with Loki. I'd ripped off my bandages and the wound had immediately deepened. But yeah, if anyone has any good interpretations or ideas about this one, please send them along.
Well, even too, like just the ending of it, it has that kind of like, the first 2 blows are the most painful. Lower your head, hide your face. After that, it doesn't matter. Like there's that feeling of like you feel something and then you're kind of lost into the unconscious after, you know what I mean? Like it even has that same, it's bookended with that, where am I, what's going on?
And that kind of contrast is going to show up a lot in Death in Spring, and it does in War So Much War too, which obviously is a very wartime related book, but also is like kind of a boy's journey through like war, sort of evading it, and although he's trying to be part of it, but like sort of hearing people's stories. And there's this kind of constant sort of like there has to be something to balance just pure war, and why you do this.
You're saying it's a coming of age story. I don't want to read. We have too much of that. That's haggard and cliche like the rest of these stories about love. So we can't have that.
No, absolutely not. No love, no coming of age. No one ever grows.
People don't grow up and people don't struggle. I don't want any of that. Can we get one about a talking dog that goes on a journey with a quirky little yeah.
And a race car.
Yeah. Now that's transgressive.
Yep. That sounds about right. But, oh man. I don't know if I have any other things to add to this particular section. I think that these ones are moving like clearly as we're going through her aging, and we know that these are all chronological. This is the period after she wrote a lot of these after they got out of France, I think, and got to Switzerland and was still processing all of the violence and the destruction that they had witnessed.
It feels like it's delving a little bit deeper than the earlier stuff.
Yeah. Like less domestic and more universal in some way.
Absolutely.
Like, a lot more about like
what your favorite of the group was Orléans?
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's the one that I found most I was most excited to read it because I didn't know until we started this podcast that she had been there when the siege took place. And so I was like, wow, it's crazy that she wrote a story about it. And then the way that it worked, I thought was pretty interesting because it has the kind of three sections with the men and the women arriving in the town. They're giving out all the wine. Everything's been like destroyed. And then the second section that's kind of like the soldiers trying to figure out where to go and what to do. And then the part where they're in that house, when they get to the house and they're like hiding in there and they're scared of like the black man that's with them, even though he's like completely helpful and whatever, but it just shows, I think the levels of fear were really intriguing to me, that there's like this grand war happening, there's bombs going on, everyone's just like sort of dealing with that in the most natural way they can, where they're just like, here's a bottle, it's just, we're raiding all the wine cellars because what else, what are we going to do? The wine will go bad, we need this, and they're trying to process that amid this like great fear. And then when it gets to this very personal, like I'm in this room sleeping next to your husband and there's a guy there and you don't trust him and you're not sure what's going on, and that weird very personal fear really struck home to me, as like that there's different things that are kind of going on in this character's mind and in the way that they're trying to deal with the different levels of reality at that point. So I thought that was really cool. I thought that was an interesting story for that reason.
Sure, whatever.
That's my pitch.
This is like 44?
Yeah.
She would have been...
We think so. There's
no bombing of Orleans in 40... I'm crap at history.
I'm going to look it up.
There was like 400 people, got offed in like 2 days or something.
Yeah. It was May 1944. 300 dead over a 4-day period. Yeah. And it's weird in the story too, because they're sort of going towards the destruction.
And she was on the move during that time, or she was there during? Wow.
Yeah, because they had escaped Spain during the Franco times because she had worked for the Catalan government. Obviously, that's not okay. When Franco took over, and then you have like all the crazy shit that happened in Spain. So like Franco's coup takes place, and then you have like the sort of communist Spaniards that are like assassinating thousands of priests and like blowing up all these buildings and injuring other people along the way. So you have like pure violence there, and they escaped to France. And then they were there because they were like, oh, well, France is getting, taken over by Germans. This is not any better. And so they ended up escaping at the end of the mid-40s to Switzerland and to Geneva. And that's where she then started writing again and published this whole collection. So yeah, so it is like it's a crazy amount of like bad luck where he went to in some sense, but also like just not, yeah. And this is from actually from the second collection that she published. So she did 22 stories, and then from starting with Ada Lee's onwards, all of those stories were from It Seemed Like Silk and other stories, including ones that we're going to go over next week, like the next 3 stories. But this is from the second collection that she did. So it is when we say like it does seem like she moved on or is doing something deeper.
Yeah,
it
that
is
makes
from the
sense.
later
There's such
one.
a big departure after Before I Die, like Ada Lee's, On a Dark Night.
Yep.
This one, yeah, they definitely have a much different feeling and tone to it.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, why don't we wrap this up with? Oh, go ahead.
Sort of more universal and less relationship based.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
More about the state of the world and like if there's any hope and where that hope exists, I think too. Like, I mean, if you start like at the beginning, like when she's writing in these stories in like the early 30s or late 20s, like there is still like a sort of like World War I has taken place and like that's broken a lot of shit for people. But like there is sort of a genuine hopefulness within these relationships that ends up getting corrupted because people are corrupt and connecting with people is hard. And then it becomes this next version seems to be more of like the world's a disaster and like how do you deal with that how do you process that as a writer, as a human being? Like, where do you, if you're in a war, you're fighting in a trench and you're going to die, like you end up creating this vision of this woman in this lovely house that's like fake and not real, but is like the place that you can return to. And yeah, I think that these do have that big shift to like globally things are not okay, rather than like domestically or within your own relationship, things are tenuous.
That's a neat point you bring up because I think wasn't World War I originally called the Great War?
Yeah.
And they believed that was like the war that was going to end. Like there'll be no more war after the Great War because it was so destructive. You can't possibly, like, we've learned our lesson, right? And then a couple decades later, Great War Part 2, like the sequel, which is always bigger and worse than the original somehow, even in movies, right?
Very true.
But no, it makes sense that you'd be looking at human and human nature, and I don't know. She strikes me somewhat as a humanist. Like there is still some hopefulness in some of the stuff underneath it. But yeah, it makes sense that theme would really start hammering home in a lot of this after the betrayal of having another war and having to move and having all the death and all the betrayal in relationships and
So.
Anyways, on that wonderful note.
Yeah. So what's your, I think George, you already said kind of what your favorite line was, but do you have a different line that you want to share as like our segue out or whatever?
Yeah. That one was just sort of struck.
Yeah.
Sort of struck me, I guess. Yeah.
I got one on page 161 that I like quite a bit. I'll read it while you look up yours, Chad, if you want.
Okay. Go for it.
It's the part where the lady is confronting the woman her husband's so enamored with, and the woman says, "Some things never die." I wanted to applaud, even though I saw that she had chosen her reply as one might choose the smallest needle amongst many. Still, she had hurt me. She had said it to hurt me and had succeeded. She spoke the words so calmly, with such control, such a penetrating voice. She hurt me, but I knew it was true. It felt as if suddenly I had been pinned to the wall and left there.
Man, that is intense too. God, I have a lot of them underlined in here.
Women be shady, man. They know how to. Men are blunt instruments, but women know how to do that little pick, right? Boom, just destroy you. They're so good at that. Women be shopping. I thought that was just a wonderful way of portraying the emotion, and like I felt like I was there with her right there at that point.
Absolutely.
Kudos, good job.
I'll go with one more from Before I Die too. Is on the last page because I usually end up with ones like this. Everything makes me laugh. The two of them and me and my regrettable suicide. All of it so passé.
All right, everybody dies.
Yep.
Good night.
Everybody dies and the play goes on. That was the one from last week, which still wrecks me. I thought of that on the plane when I thought that our turbulence was going to cause our plane to just crash. I was like, "Yep," and then the play will continue on. Everything. And I'll just be
what
gone.
A cliche. I'm sitting here praying for my family as the plane goes down.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Oh, man. Anyways, so George, thank you very much for joining us to talk about this. And for anyone listening, next week we'll go over the last stories of this book. So I think there's 5 of them. It is or 6: The Thousand-Franc Bill, Paralysis, It Seemed Like Silk, The Salamander, Love, and White Geranium. I bet Love is going to be an uplifting one.
this the live one? No, the live one you're doing is from the novel, right?
Yeah, the live one will be the very last, the end of the novel, and we'll sort of recap everything. So that will be on December 12th when we record it, and it will be live, or it'll be available as a podcast like a week and a half later, I think.
Well, cool. Hopefully we'll get through both of those before Catalonia no longer exists. So
right. Yeah.
Let's be optimistic and hopeful.
Exactly. Thanks again, man.
Hey, good talking with you, George.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.